Hello, everyone. This is going to be my presentation on Fanny Fern. So, I just have some biography stuff. So, her real name is originally Sarah Payson Willis. She was the fifth child of nine. Her parents were Nathaniel Willis and Hannah Parker. She was born on July 9th, 1811, in Portland, Maine. She spent most of her time in Boston because her father was a newspaper editor and a deacon at the Park Street Church. And her older brother, Nathaniel Parker Willis, was an established writer and editor as well. That'll be important later. Um, Sarah attended Catherine Beecher's prestigious Hartford Female Seminary in Hartford, Massachusetts in 1828. While she was there, she showed impressive talents in literature, and after she left school, she wrote pieces for her father's children's periodical called The Youth Companion. In 1837, Sarah married Charles Harrington Eldridge. He was a banker in Boston, and they had three daughters. In the next few years, Sarah suffered many losses throughout her life. Her youngest sister died in childbirth in 1844. Her oldest daughter died of meningitis in 1846. Her mother died a few days later. And then soon after this, her husband died of typhoid. So she lost a lot of people in this small amount of time. Um, After this, she was forced to remarry because she had still two daughters and little financial support from her family and from her late husband's family. So she married Samuel Farrington, who was a merchant, who had also lost his previous wife. So they were both on their second marriage. This marriage, unlike her first marriage to Charles, was horrible. Samuel was unkind and would get very jealous. He often accused Sarah of infidelity and would use these claims to try and turn her two daughters against her. After only 2 years of marriage, Samuel, after 2 years of marriage to Samuel, she made a bold move and took both of her daughters to Boston and stayed in a hotel. This decision was obviously very scandalous and was very scandalized. Many people talked about her, and Samuel was very mad at this decision, obviously, and he spread even more rumors about her integrity and how it was questionable. He eventually filed for divorce, which was granted on September 7th of 1953, or of 1853, sorry. Um, After this, she needed, obviously, to provide for her children. She had to find a way to do that. This was when she started with the pseudonym Fanny Fern. She began writing as Fanny for a newspaper columns called True Flag and Olive Branch in Boston. She hardly earned enough money to support her family, but Fanny Fern began to gain a lot of popularity with the readers. Since there was not many copyright restrictions in the mid-19th century, her columns were often reprinted in many other articles, so even though she was only writing for the two newspaper columns at this time, her articles were getting reprinted in many other places, which was obviously causing her to get even more popularity. Her brother Nathaniel, as I said, was a famous newspaper um, publisher, and he had a publication called The Home Journal. In 1846 was when he started it, and it was very successful by the 1850s. James Parton, who was Nathaniel's editor for his article, liked Fanny Fern's work so much that he started publishing for it in the Home Journal. Nathaniel didn't know that about his sister, and that his sister was the person who was writing these articles. And when he found out, he decided to tell James Parton, his publisher, that he was not allowed to publish her anymore. And James fought this because he really liked her work, and he actually ended up resigning from the position because of how angry he was. He did it in protest. So that's just a little bit about her brother and how he was not very supportive of her writing and her popularity at this time. And so as her fame grew, a publisher from New York approached her and asked her to write a collection of columns for them. Fern agreed to this, and she agreed to royalty payments instead of just getting a big lump sum, and that ends up being really important. She ends up getting a lot more money from that. So that was a good idea for her to do. She wrote Fern Leaves from Fanny's portfolio and sold nearly 100,000 copies. Then she moved to New York while she was doing this, and she started writing for the Musical World and Times, a periodical edited by her older brother, Richard Willis. This is, her other brother, not Nathaniel, but Richard also didn't know that this was his sister. They still, like at this point, he didn't know, his publisher didn't know. They just liked her work. And so they offered to pay her double what she was making to publish only for the Musical World and Times, which is her brother's publication. Eventually, he did find out that Fanny Fern was his sister Sarah. When he did, he responded way better than Nathaniel did. He still let her publish for them, and he encouraged for her to keep writing. So he was definitely way more encouraging and would let her do it for him. He didn't stop it. And so from her payments from this, combined with her royalty payments from Fern Leaves from Fanny's portfolio, she was able to dedicate herself fully to writing, and she was able to take care of her children with just this income, which was a really big step for her, because now she could only write. She didn't have to do other things on the side. After this, she did continue to publish. She published 2 more books, another collection of columns, and a collection of a children's book entitled Little Ferns for Fanny's Little Friends. And then in December of 1854, she published her first novel called Ruth Hall, a Domestic, the Tale of the Present Time. Sorry, I can't talk. The book was about a woman who suffers the death of her first husband and receives the cold shoulder from her brother, a newspaper editor, only to become a successful newspaper columnist. It doesn't specify whether she, wrote this about herself, but it's pretty clear that, at least for me too, I think to assume that it has something to do based on her life. The sales of this book actually skyrocketed when readers found out that Sarah Willis was in fact Fanny Fern, and she was the sister of the well-known editor Nathaniel Willis. And so I think people realized that this was her kind of writing about her own story, and it really made her sales go up. So that was good for her. Then by critics, she was considered to be unfeminine and indelicate because of this book, because she was satirizing her family in public. But even though she was getting this bad critiques, Fanny Fern was better than it had ever been. She was very popular, and she was making a lot of money. So even with this bad press, she was still really good, and really great great writer. And then she was approached again by Robert Boner, who was the editor of the New York Ledger. He offered her money 3 times. Offered this position 3 times. The first time he offered her $25 per column, she refused. He then offered her $50 per column. She also refused again. And then he offered her money $75 per column, and she refused yet again. And then finally, a little bit later, he came back and decided to offer her $100 per column for a serialized story, which Fanny Fern finally accepted. After, on the fourth time, she finally accepted. This made her the highest paid newspaper writer in the country. Her serialized story was called Fanny Ford. She agreed to write weekly columns for the New York Ledger starting in 1856. She wrote these weekly columns until her death in 1872. So she was very dedicated to writing for them and making, all this money. In 1856, she married James Parton, who was the newspaper editor that resigned from her brother Nathaniel's editing position because of how much he liked Fern's work. So it was really a good marriage for her. From what I got, they were pretty happy in this marriage. It was better than her last marriage. Fern actually battled cancer for the last 6 years of her life. She died because of her disease on October 10th of 1872. Her tombstone has only 2 words written on it, which I thought was really interesting. So the only 2 words on her tombstone are just Fanny Fern, which to me showed that obviously this is a really big part of her life. This is really something that she cared about, and I mean it made her, not only famous but also made her a lot of money, made her this big person that was very influential at the time. And so those were the only two words on her gravestone. So that's just a little bit about her. My annotations that I took them from the Fresh Leaves reading we had to do. I took them from a couple different writing, or a couple different of the stories in the collection. The first one I did was, it says, now if I could travel in incog, in masculine attire. This was on page 57. Incog is incognito, which is of a person having one's true identity concealed. So I thought that just because it only gives, incog, that was important to annotate just so people reading knew that they meant incognito. The next one I did, it says no tresses to keep smooth, which was also on page 57. Tresses is a lock of woman's hair. The next one I did was in Jiggle Joggle for the Brakeman. So I actually did, Jiggle Joggle, which it came up, both of them, Jiggle and Joggle, which is he just put together, which would just be to shake slightly, to move to and fro, as by repeated jerks. So I think that most people know, what jiggle means, but I thought them together was an interesting way of using them, so I decided to put that in. I also did, in this sentence, Brakeman, who I got a couple different things for this. I wasn't really sure which one was exactly right, so I just put them both in. It says, brakeman, a railroad worker responsible for a train's brakes and other aspects of its operation, or just a person in charge of brakes. This one says, for instance, in a bobsled. So it's obviously like two different kinds of brakes, but I think it's just someone who is in charge of the brakes. So that was important to put in. I had one that said, did you ever stand in the midst of your gaslighted damask curtain? So I thought that was important because, damask, I didn't do the word curtain because we know what curtains are, but damask curtain is a figured woven fabric with a pattern visible on both sides, typically used for linen or upholstery. So I didn't know what that meant actually, so I thought that was interesting. The next one I did said, did you ever see your ghost-like habiliments dangling day after day from pegs in the wall? So I did the habiliments, which is the dress characteristic of an occupation or occasion, usually used in plural. So it also says clothes, so just some kind of clothes that someone's wearing was what I got for that word. The next one I did said, Centurion ragman will lumber past on his crazy old cart. So centurion is of a person's voice, loud and powerful. So someone who's just talking really loud, really powerful. They have that strong voice. I also did with his nightingales and bulbuls and jessamines. So the jessamines, I wasn't really sure about that one. It says that it also comes from jessamum, which is any of numerous, often climbing shrubs of the olive family, and usually have extremely fragrant flowers, especially a tall climbing semi-evergreen Asian shrub with fragrant white flowers from which oil is extracted for use in perfumes. So yeah, that one I thought was pretty interesting. And then I had a taking of coup deceit. Sorry, it's not how you pronounce that probably, but of your feminine effects. I did the coup deceit, which is a sudden, decisive exercise of force in politics, especially the violent overthrow or alteration of an existing government by a small group of military. So yeah, that one, I definitely didn't know what that one meant. I thought that one was probably pretty important as well. But yeah, so that's all I've done. The annotations and everything are attached as well. So if you want to look at those, if I pronounced anything wrong, which I know I probably did, and you need clarification, there's that as well. Also, sorry if I'm talking weird. I'm a little bit sick. So, but yeah, that's everything. I hope you guys have a great week, and I'll see you all next week. Thank you.